On today's episode, we have Pete Prowitt, Director of Sales and Success at Loom.
Tune in to learn about Pete's philosophy on the SDR to AE promotion track, as he shares specific steps on how an SDR can achieve promotion readiness to get you to the next step. Your success is our success, so let's get started.
From the heart of Silicon Valley in beautiful San Francisco, California, welcome to the SDR Live podcast with Marcos and Andy.
Awesome. All right. Well, on today's show, we have Pete Prowitt. Pete, welcome to the SDR Live.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Marcos and Andy.
Of course. We're really excited to have you. Director of Sales at one of my favorite companies, Loom. But on top of that, today we're going to be talking about the SDR to AE progression and some of the great insights that you have when you start off as an SDR. And so, usually like how we start the podcast, just would love to learn a little bit more about, your background. If you have any fun facts, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm from the DC area. I grew up in and throughout my entire life was a basketball player. Was very tall early and loved basketball. Prior to actually playing, I stayed up late like a weirdo reading basketball cards until 2 in the morning and memorizing facts. And then I had a chance to play in college. I played at Stanford, and I had a chance to play in Germany prior to becoming an early retiree and kind of finding my next career. And after a couple of stints as a speechwriter and then working as an investment banker, I found my way into technology sales and really thankfully have worked at some great companies with really inspirational people. And one of the things that I love about your podcast and really what you're looking to build here is that technology sales and sales in general can be a super fulfilling career choice. And surfacing that to people kind of at those early stages is super important, just because I never thought I was going to be a salesperson growing up.
Yeah, that is very true. And I really resonated with that. I got my degree in finance. And so I was thinking about investment banking, kind of that route, but decided to go more of the, tech sales. And that's kind of how we found the SV Academy, which you're a mentor of, correct?
I've done some work with the SV Academy for the last couple of years and truly believe in its mission. I think Raheem and that team, Joel and that team, Zara, are just stellar people. So it's one of the organizations that I think is really cool. And you and Andy are great examples of graduates who can go on to do incredible things. And what you're doing now is really inspirational.
Really appreciate the kind words. And so I was actually looking at your LinkedIn and saw you started as an SDR, which is great because our primary audience is SDRs that are starting or those that are really looking to grow their career. And so maybe you could talk a little bit more about, if you remember your best quarter that you might have had maybe as an SDR or an AE, I think that'd be great.
Yeah. So I joined as an SDR a much longer time ago than I'd care to say. But starting off as an SDR, I joined a company that was in hyper growth. I was working at Box at the time during kind of the early days. And one of the things that I really loved about that time was it was a fast-paced, hyper-growth, really different environment than I'd ever been in. Different than putting on a suit and tie every day and going into my investment bank. Different than working in government, which was kind of stodgy and maybe bureaucratic at times. Certainly different than playing a basketball team. But coming in and getting a sense of, hey, these are people who are super dialed in, who see this opportunity, who want to cause this real change and disruption in the workplace in general, was really cool. Now, I think the converse of that was I assumed that every company kind of had this rocket ship growth and this hyper growth trajectory. And so a lot of the learnings when I look back on that period of time are colored with, man, I wish I knew this at that time, or I wish I knew how good that was or how special that was. Because it is one of those things where if you have a great situation, you can learn so much, but you're going to learn either scenario.
That's so interesting. Starting off as like more of a startup, experiencing that fast growth, and then potentially going into more like enterprise accounts where it's, a little bit more dead, and you kind of have to, situate yourself to be successful. And so, one thing that, Andy and I have been seeing from our audience is this idea. It's like, hey, Marcus and Andy, you guys are SDRs, you're crushing it, but, what's next? And we actually surveyed 95 SDRs when we first started this podcast. And we asked them, what do you want your next role to be? Overwhelmingly, 80% said account executive. But I'm curious to see if we actually have different ways in which we think about it. I know as an SDR, I wanted to become an AE like automatically, like very fast. And it was like my mission, right, to be an AE. But sometimes, you have a phenomenal article on how, the impatient SDR, right, and why it actually takes some time to actually become an AE. So I'm curious in getting your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I look back now with the better part of a decade in sales experience is to realize how disconnected what I thought I was learning as an SDR was from what I was actually learning. And I was really like absorbing a lot of information around how sales works, how companies work, how people buy, how decisions are made, how to frame conversations, and to communicate more effectively during a time where I thought I wasn't learned that much. And just to give you a sense of like how disconnected that was, I remember, I think my second month as an SDR meeting with my SVP and saying, well, I've been doing this for 2 months and I beat my last month quota, so I think I'm ready to make the jump to AE. Which, by the way, I wouldn't advise for new SDRs in their career to say, oh, by the way, check me out, I'm ready to make this jump. But I think it goes to show that really almost anybody who's worked in an SDR role has their eyes on some role after that. So it's important to do your absolute level best and to learn the most you can during that role. And it's one of the more important roles in my career where I look back at what I learned at that time and super thankful for the 15 months I spent as an SDR. However, it's also important to acknowledge that there's going to be something for everyone in the next role who's in an SDR role today. So to think through some of the ways like how to get there, what are some of the pitfalls you want to avoid, and how to make sure you're thinking about your career in a long-term sense is something I'm super passionate about.
Yeah. And maybe Andy, you could talk a little bit more about like the situation you're in too, because I know a lot of SDRs are experiencing the same situation.
Right. And just to give context, obviously, we'll probably release this episode soon, but the COVID is still happening. It is July, beginning of July. So with that context and background set, I'm sure a lot of other SDR folks are in similar situations like me, where I've been in SDR since last March. And like you said, Pete, before, it's a lot of people see the SDR role as either like a gateway into tech or just a gateway into a closing position. Whatever position it is, it's more of that first stepping stone into another one. So I also had my eyes on the prize. I wanted it to become a closer within a year was my goal, but like due to COVID, it was revisited since Inside View is currently on a hiring freeze. So everything has stopped, and then obviously things are getting anxious, and I feel like I'm becoming stagnant in my career, which is why like I'm really excited to hear kind of an opposing thought of like how I can reshift my mindset and make the best out of the situation that I'm sure others are also in.
Yeah. And first of all, I feel for you. That sounds like a challenging situation. And, it's the whole world was really surprised by COVID. And in the past, there have been different macroeconomic issues that will cascade down into how people purchase and how purchasing decisions are made. But one thing I want to make very clear about people who decide to become sales professionals as their career is that everything is going to come down to timing, technique, and opportunity. And so there's an element of this that was all just kind of poor timing. There's an element of this which is what you controlled, what was your effort, your technique, your outputs. And then there's an element of it that's opportunity. If you are the best SDR in the world, or you're the best rep in the world, or you're the best sales leader in the world, and there's no kind of macro or company need for that next role at that time, it really doesn't matter. So I think that there's an element of this that's like controlling what you control and understanding what's outside of your control and finding some level of peace with it. And particularly for anyone who's going to pursue a career in sales as a sales professional, it's going to boil down to that every single quarter you work.
That's interesting because I feel like I might have hit it right before COVID, right? I was able to get promoted as account executive at Okta right before everything went haywire. If not, I probably would have been in a similar situation. And what it seems like is this idea of like a growth mindset, right? Kind of switching it from, oh, poor me to, you know what, like maybe this is a time to build. And so I'm curious to get in your thoughts because when I was preparing for AE, I ended up doing a lot of shadowing, trying to run smaller deal cycles and convince my AE to help me do that. Do you have any advice to like the audience out there on how they could switch their mindset to more so like being prepared? Because I know when I started as an AE, totally different motion, right?
Yeah. No, I think that it sounds like what you did was you took a more proactive approach to your skill development and your career development by reaching out to AEs and shadowing them, by working smaller transactional deals, potentially started listening to different podcasts, reading different books, and taking a little bit more of an ownership role on your career. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make in any career. But again, for sales, is to understand that we measure ourselves every quarter based on the outcomes that we can drive. What was our quota? How did we do against it? How much revenue did we drive? How many meetings did we generate? How many leads did we generate? All of those things are important because that's what we're signing up to our companies to deliver. At the same time, there are true skills and things that will matter for your career progression, more so than any one quarter you have right now, that you can work on and develop today. You know, like to start to unpack, like what's the actual skill that will make me a better AE? Is it figuring out how to run better discovery? Is it figuring out how to leverage different negotiation techniques in a way that's going to help me maintain leverage over the course of the deal cycle? Is it setting upfront mutual contracts with my customers such that we can better project manage these deals to a close? There are discrete skills that will go into those. And for the portion of sales that you can control, which we all agree isn't all of it, for everything under your control, you can make sure you're executing at a higher level. I think the last piece of this, at the risk of sounding a little preachy, is you will always learn something new. You will never master it. Like there was something earlier today I learned after 10 years of working in sales. I was like, I should do that very differently. And sales is kind of it's a forever teacher in that type of profession.
So interesting, like side note here. And it's kind of different, like approach. So my whole goal was like, all right, so this is something my manager taught me, but I don't think a lot of SDRs realize the power of consistency. And so you'll see a lot of sales reps either like hit their number and then drop off and hit their number, drop off. And what my manager told me is like, what you want to be is consistent so we could forecast like, oh, Marcus is going to hit his number X, Y, and Z. Would you say that's also like one of the more important metrics to hit? Because there's a lot of SDR managers like, hey, you have to hit 50 calls, 100 emails a day. But I feel like being more consistent with your quota attainment is probably more important.
I think there's something interesting there to unpack. And this has more long-term ripple effects there. When somebody talks about consistency in sales, it's really mapping to understanding your business, to understand what's the true probability of the deals that you're working. What's the real problem that customer is looking to solve? Is this a nice to have? Is this a need to have? What does timing look like on their end? And ultimately, how accurately can you forecast your own business? And I think that's the skill set that you map back to, that great AEs really understand their customers, do great discovery so that they can more accurately forecast their business. And then great sales managers and sales leaders can more accurately forecast their business, which leads to companies having more predictable revenue and being successful long-term once you go to IPO and all of a sudden Wall Street is looking at your quarterly return. So I think like there's an element of this that goes into your individual performance. But it's super important for you to take whatever you're doing as an SDR and to extrapolate that out to your manager, to your VP, to your CRO, and then potentially, to your investors, your board. Like there's some input here that maps to that greater outcome. And knowing that path is going to really help you focus your efforts to something that's going to be more business positive.
Would you say there's any like tangible advice? Because like forecasting is hard. And so I actually had a mentor of mine that said, you know what I did is I went through all our Salesforce opportunities and I saw what stage they were in. And I reached out to the AE and said, hey, can you explain to me why this is in commit or why this is only in best case? And so maybe that's like a tangible insight that I did. But I'm curious, like if you have any other ways in which an SDR could start preparing more so for like forecasting.
I think the most important thing, and the example that you called out, is one where as a manager, you have to go and you have conversations with your reps, and you wind up doing a deal review where you try and outline and highlight any gaps. Are there questions we haven't asked? Are there inputs we don't know? Are there things that are going to potentially threaten this deal? And if you do a good job of that, you know where kind of your gaps are, and you have an action plan on how best to address them. In an ideal world, your reps will be able to do that more on their own. And I think the best SDRs are the ones that like truly understand what opportunities are going to be the most fruitful for their AEs, and then can inform kind of how they move against those. Like if you have a Fortune 20 company that's part of your SDR quota, and you have a great inroads to them, you have to do a little bit of multi-threading to figure out the right department, the right person to get to, but you're able to uncover that. That's actually probably more valuable than that small transactional deal, even if the two are weighted the same. And then starting to think about like, what's the business outcome that you want to map to here? And how can you align your activity to that greater business outcome? That's the beautiful thing about sales is you can kind of make your own luck. Like there's something you can try and test and have some real ownership over that's going to, if you do it right, it's going to deliver you a raise at the end of that next quarter or next month.
I love that. And kind of a clarifying question I have, when you mean measure your business activity to kind of the impact, what do you mean by business activity? Like the amount of calls you're doing, or specifically what action are you referring to?
It could be calls. It could be meetings you set. When you're an AE, it could be deals that you close. It could be where you spend your time prospecting. Ultimately, you always want to have a measure of, is the input that I'm putting in here, is the activity that I'm putting in leading me to the outcome that I want? If not, how can we change it up? How can I test something new? And if it is there something that I can potentially do more of or do better that will even expand these outcomes? So I think that's the real A/B testing mindset that sales reps have. And I know this is something Richard Harris is super passionate about, is A/B testing different subject lines, different approaches, different things that work or don't. But there's always a chance to either try something new if you're not achieving the outcome that you want, or to improve on something that you're seeing success with.
So that's great insight. A/B test, baby. I came from Optimizely, so I'm a huge proponent of experimentation, but I always get excited about it because I do it every day. And so what I'm curious too is there's some SDRs out there that are like, okay, do I want to get promoted internally or should I look elsewhere? So I'm not sure if this is more of a controversial topic, but how would you advise like an SDR, like if they had to come up with the game plan, I would think they should probably reach out to like the AE manager, kind of see what steps they need to take to get to that role. And then kind of start making a plan of attack and strategy from there.
Yeah, this is tough because it gets into kind of situational differences. What I would hope for everyone in their SDR role is that they have a manager and leader that they can have truly candid and fruitful conversations with, and to be able to ask questions of, hey, here's what I've proven to date. Here's what I'm working on. Here's where I could really leverage your help. Based on this, when there's that next opportunity and that business need, does this put me in a position that's going to be really compelling for that next hire? Is this going to get me closer to somebody that you're going to stand up for and feel really good about endorsing for that next AE role or whatever that next role is? By the way, that's a way better way to frame that than my initial, I've been doing this for 2 months. I'm ready for my first AE role. So as long as you're not starting off with the way I approached it, you're probably ahead of me already. But I think that it's a matter of you having a real conversation, then being open to, if your manager says, hey, I actually haven't seen this from you, or somebody else is doing this differently, or I don't feel comfortable with, digging into that and really trying to assess, is this feedback that I can act on? Is this something that I can incorporate into my approach? Even though it might sting at the time when you hear it.
I'm curious in getting your thoughts on my approach and if it was a good strategy. So if you're open to it, I'd be happy to kind of share my approach and how I kind of went about it.
Sure, let's do it.
All right. So first thing I did is like, all right, if I'm going to get promoted internally, I need to, build my brand. So what I wanted to focus on initially was becoming the team lead at optimizing for the SDRs, right? Being consistent, hitting my number, being reliable. But what I ended up doing after that, I reached out to our VP of sales, asked him for time on the calendar. I know he's very busy. So it was a 30-minute check-in. Within that check-in, I asked him, hey, do you have a 30, 60, 90? Or like, what are some of the key traits that you look for in a great AE? And he gave me like a document. So based off that document, my next steps, there should always be a next step, because I thought like I'm interviewing internally. So what I ended up doing is I set up a monthly recurring invite, and I would come to him prepared and say, hey, these are the stats that I've done as an SDR. These are my learnings, but I also did this in preparation for an AE. I led a budget call with the AE by my side, and these were, my results. And essentially I did that for like 3 or 4 weeks. On top of like that, I was also branding myself internally with the account executives at my former company to kind of have them like be a champion for me. So I thought of it more as a deal cycle. But what I ended up doing is I just had so much learnings, because I reached out to my mentor. He's their top performing AE there. I said, can you there has to be a reason why you run discovery so good. What is your strategy? And I sat down with him, and he was like, oh, I asked this question for a reason, or I asked this question, and then if they say this, then I say that. And I just kept typing all these notes. And so when it came time for like my interview, I felt very prepared. And I think, the way I approached it was like, if I'm going to get hired internally or externally, the main goal is to make sure that I'm prepared, because I don't want to be a failing AE right away. I want to be someone that can come in, own my own book of business. And I feel like I showed that, and that kind of led to the progression. But I'm curious, is that a good strategy? Would you fix anything with that?
Well, so clearly for you, it's led to you working your first closing role. So there's some real success there. And kudos to you for taking a really thoughtful and intentional approach to running this process. Before I weigh in on this, how would you self-assess there? How would you grade yourself?
I love it. Putting it back on me. I would say, so I thought of it, I'm very methodical. So I really wanted to think, how can I future-proof this? Because if, say, for example, I don't get this job, could I go elsewhere and, still produce at the same level? And so I would grade myself as pretty high because of the learnings. Now, if I wasn't learning anything and I was staying stagnant, then I'd be pretty harsh on myself. But since I was learning how to forecast different things, how people go about building their territory and creating P1 accounts versus tier 1 accounts versus tier 2, tier 3, I would say it was invaluable. So I would rate myself pretty high, but I'm always up to constructive criticism.
So what I liked, and I could be hearing this wrong, but what I really liked about this was you spent some time focusing from people who had demonstrated a real aptitude for different skill sets. The AE who was great at discovery, getting your VP of sales to list through what are the characteristics that you're looking for. And what you did, whether consciously or subconsciously, was start to incorporate that in your approach. You learned what forecasting looked like. You learned different discovery questions. And you started this whole process where you were actually, whether knowingly or unknowingly, making yourself a more valuable commodity as a sales professional long-term. Now, I think one of the things you mentioned early on was building your brand with AEs. In short-term, that matters, or building your brand with your VP. Short-term, that matters. But long-term, over the course of your career, if you've actually invested in these skills and you know how to do this stuff, that's going to yield better results versus a 4-week meeting kind of a campaign with different stakeholders at your company. Not to say that that was a bad approach. But I think what you started to do and what you might have learned over that period of time is different than what you thought you were going to learn or do when you set out from it. And that's kind of the beautiful part of this is there's a lot of ways to have a fulfilling career in tech or in sales or different companies. There's a lot of ways to go about it. And so anybody who says it's a one size fits all and here's the playbook to do it, they're probably full of it. That said, what you're able to do is find things that intrinsically make you a better long-term prospect and a better professional. And that's the advice I would give to anyone is during your time, and Andy, this is one that is probably close to your home, during your time as an SDR, make sure you're learning skills that will make you a better AE. And sometimes there's a delta where somebody's really successful as an SDR, but the skill set that they've developed doesn't immediately translate into making them a successful AE. And I think that's where you have to have a candid conversation with yourself to get a sense of, am I learning how to set these mutual upfront contracts? Am I learning how to do deep discovery? Am I learning how to do negotiation? Am I learning things that will carry me through long term? And if I'm not, where can I find them? Is it a leader? Is it another AE? Is it a podcast? Is it a book? How do I build myself up to make myself the absolute best version for long-term success?
Awesome. I love that you said that. And that kind of ties in to my next question about like promotional timelines versus promotional readiness of why, I would love to hear your thoughts of why the concept of professional time of that timeline is, can be hurtful in like an SDR's career development, especially in a sales role when everybody is really comparing each other or like looking at numbers and et cetera. And you're seeing how other people are promoted within this timeline, but you're not, and how that can really cause some stress and anxiety between other sales reps.
Oh, it really caused some stress and anxiety for me. It still does. Everyone wants to get promoted, and most people want to get promoted faster than they're actually promoted. It's a human thing, and you can accept that as tension that you will live with throughout your career and life. The reason that I think promotion timelines are such a bad idea and are detrimental to your own success is they matter to you, and they actually don't matter to the people in charge of your promotion. Like nobody in charge of your promotion meaning with the ability to give you that promotion, nobody in that position to promote you to an AE will look at it and say like, well, Pete's been here for 8 months, so we should really get on top of this. Like that's just not how promotions, it's usually a review of who's demonstrated an aptitude over a sustained period of 3 to 4 quarters, who's distanced themselves from the group, who do I feel like has developed a skill set that's going to lead them to success fastest, who do I have the highest degree of confidence in to take this bet on that's painful to me as hiring manager and painful to company if it doesn't work out. So I think like that's the thing that I have, the problem that I have with this idea of promotion timelines is they matter to you, but they actually don't matter to a lot of the people who are going to be intrinsically important to that decision-making process. So it's the wrong thing to focus on and can really drive you crazy, as it has for me and for so many people.
That's a good point, because sales from my perspective, I'm still fairly young in my career, but it's always just trying to understand another persona, right? What's at stake for them. So I always get curious, and you alluded to it there, like, the director of sales or, VP of sales, whatever, right, are not really going to care. That it's maybe more so, can this person produce for me? So what would be, a few things that would stand out that would make you, more confident in an SDR getting promoted?
I think a couple of things. One is actions speak louder than words. And so it's really important to make sure that if you're building that brand, if you want to be the consistent rep, if you want to be the best at discovery, upfront contracts, if you want to be the highest producer on your team, that you follow through and show it. And I think that's going to be the ultimate thing that will hold you back from that promotion, is you failing to deliver on your core responsibilities. It's possible to deliver on your core responsibilities and not get a promotion. It is impossible to not deliver on your core responsibilities and get that promotion. So I think that's kind of like the phase one, and it's an old Jack Welchism, the old CEO of GE, where when asked what's the best way to get ahead in your career, his response was always to over deliver in your current role. So I think like having that as a foundation is important. And the second piece is, once you feel like you're developing some mastery and once you feel like you're delivering your core responsibilities, to start to look candidly. And I think that the easiest way to do this is to start with yourself and say, what am I not good at? Like, what's the next thing I have to deliver? And when you're an SDR, it might be negotiation. you haven't had to negotiate deals, you don't understand leverage points, you don't understand like framing, positioning. And that would be the skill set you spend a month shadowing calls and specifically trying to figure out how do people negotiate. You spend a month reading a book, you do something specifically to address that skill. But it starts from a place of accepting, hey, you're actually not fantastic at everything because you haven't had a chance to actually demonstrate it. And being able to have that self-awareness of like, what's the next thing I need to work at? And then how do I start to chip away at that? I think that is so important. And once you're having a conversation with the hiring manager, if you can say like, here's how I've performed, here are the skill sets that I really thought would make me successful in the next role, and here's how I've worked towards those skill sets, that's really separating you from a lot of the other people who are applying for that job.
That's great that you hit on the point of weaknesses, because you know, that's actually what my VP of sales said. It was like, you know, go through this, you know, crazy document on, you know, what makes great AEs at our company. And I want you to list out the strengths and weaknesses. And one of the weaknesses I had was that fact of like a delegation and negotiation, right? And so what I ended up doing is I ended up asking, you know, other reps on the team, hey, you know, in a polite way, right? Because if you do it in a conceited way, people, I feel like, won't help you at all. And that's where I think a lot of SDRs could kind of, they're not willing to put in the work. But if you approach it like, hey, I know you're busy, can you help me with this? I think AE would more than likely be willing to help you. And also like, you know, this could be a little controversial, but I feel like they would internally fight for you if they got on your side. So that's kind of why I did more like the brand building. But it's great to hear like hit that 100% quota, focus on those weaknesses, and then show up to the hiring manager. Hey, this is what I learned. This is how I improved it. This is what I would do in the next phase.
Yeah, that would definitely resonate well with me.
Awesome. Well, there we go, Andy. Like that's your way to promotion, man.
All written down.
Oh, I love it. And yeah, so I'm really excited about this, but we'll wrap it up with a few rapid fire questions. Again, Pete, like really appreciate your time. And, you know, just before we go to the rapid fire, you'll be able to share like a few tangible tactics. I'll also share the article, but you'll share those in a video, correct?
Totally. And kind of as a preface to that, I want to share that a lot of what I've learned over the past decade is directly from my failings. So if you fail at something or you look back at some previous interview or some previous interaction where you dropped the ball, it's okay. It's part of the process. But it's super important to figure out what are the true skills that are going to help make me more prepared and better at for that next opportunity, and how can I maximize my chances to be successful once I get that AE role. I think that's the other part of it is it's not the end of the road. Once you're there, you got to figure out what you need to do and what do you need to change, and kind of that same process of being successful in that, and then your first manager role and your first executive role, maybe your first co-founder role. There's always going to be that learning curve, and it's just a natural part of that process.
That's a good point. And not to talk about experimentation, but I always like this idea of test, learn, and iterate, right? So always constantly testing, learning, iterate. So our first rapid fire question, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. The old sales question, do you love to win or do you hate to lose?
Oh, hate to lose. I do a lot of stuff with a smile on my face, but I'm actually kind of a psychopath. And so it's definitely hate to lose.
It's like that deep like fire down burning in you, I'm sure.
I love that. And second question, who would you say are the 3 people who have been the most influential to you?
This is a good one. I really liked, so I'll like 2 real life and then 1 aspirational celebrity. Most influential to me from aspirational celebrity perspective is Magic Johnson, for a couple of reasons. I loved Magic Johnson, the basketball player, somebody who, when he was at his absolute best and most dominant, everyone around him was really achieving at their highest level. So I like the idea of somebody who's super dependable, but can like really rise the boat for everyone, rise the tides for everyone. And then the second reason I love, Magic Johnson as kind of like a person was his ability to reinvent himself as an incredibly successful business tycoon to figure out different ways of kind of taking the next chapter in his life and applying what he'd learned, but learning something totally new and getting into new and uncomfortable spaces. We're not going to include his brief tenure as the Lakers GM in recent years, but I'm sure he learned something like really interesting and ultimately fulfilling from that. The others are my dad, who I absolutely model myself after, and I think he's a fantastic leader. And also my mom. She's the president of a company of a government affairs firm in Arlington, Virginia. So two incredible role models in their professional lives. And I had one mentor who is an early manager of mine, but is somebody I stay super close with today. Whose motto with me is "I'll always stab you in the front," and I've loved the honest nature of our conversations, and credit a lot of the things where I found success or had happy experiences in sales to working with this manager who was really willing to have some radical candor type conversations with me.
Love that. I'm a big Laker fan. Sorry, everybody out there, but yes, you're right about Magic being the GM. As far as, I love to read books. So does the audience. Do you have any good book recommendations? And that could be anywhere from, a fiction that you read or, a sales book. It really depends on what you like to read.
Yeah. The most stirring book I've read in the past 5 years is this book my brother recommended to me called Righting My Wrongs by a guy named Shaka Senghor. And it's about his an early crime he committed, his kind of decades in prison and what he learned and how he survived. And it's really about reinvention and this idea of figuring out how to drive real positivity and kind of stick with, when people talk about grit, this is an incredible story of grit and reinvention and just super inspirational to me. And so that was fantastic. The best sales book and the one that I have no affiliation with, but I stomp every chance I get, is a book by this guy, Todd Capone, called The Transparency Sale. And it's all around how people are really adept at picking up on BS, picking up on fraudulent interactions. And that actually, as a salesperson, if you can get closer to your authentic self, I said BS, and you could tell that's not the word I wanted to say. But if you can get closer to your voice and how you communicate and what you truly feel as you approach your job in sales, it's so much more powerful than a script that's not truly yours or something that feels inauthentic. And most people will probably pick up on it.
That's a good point that you mentioned there. And I think Andy mentioned to this when I was starting on during the SV Academy Fellowship. And I felt like a lot of SDRs early on, it's we're scripted to say these questions, right? But really that kind of leads to more robotic, not who you are. I like to laugh and have fun and smile. And, I'm going to definitely pick up Transparency Sale for that. So thanks for that.
Absolutely.
I love that. The next question, it's what advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours, or just any advice you would give after being through many different positions that have gotten you to where you are today?
I like that these are rapid fire questions, but I'm giving you 5-minute answers for each of them.
No worries. No worries.
The advice I would give is just stick with it and have confidence you'll figure it out. It's literally if I tried to recreate my career in different stops, I don't think I could, and I've been incredibly lucky to work with the people I have. But there's a real element of kind of a non-linear aspect to your career. Sometimes you'll be in a position where it's really rocket ship, and then sometimes you'll go through some struggle, and that's all part of the process. And learn how to kind of stick with it and to demonstrate grit and resilience. That's going to be more important than any one job.
So great to hear. And the 3 things I wrote down early on: timing, technique, and opportunity. And so I'll leave you with that, audience. But where can people reach out to you? Can they connect with you on LinkedIn? If so, where's that at?
Absolutely. So you can reach out to me. My name is Pete Prowitt on LinkedIn. It's really the only social network that I engage with is now a dad in his 30s. But yeah, reach out to me there. Sometimes I'll post things on Medium or on LinkedIn, different blog posts. So feel free to look out there. And for anybody who's kind of going through this SDR to AE transition, stick with it, hang in there. It's been a tension and maybe a painful process for many people before you and will be for after. But it's important to know you're not alone. A lot of people have gone through those same growing pains.
There you go. Words of wisdom right there. Really appreciate your time and can't wait to get you on the podcast maybe, down the line as well.
Thank you so much, Pete.
Thank you for listening to the SDR Live podcast. If you like this episode, please share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you tune in next week and have a fantastic week.